This is an interview with Mrs. Gwendolyn Gamble for the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute's Oral History Project. I'm Dr. Horace Huntley. We're at Miles College, January 24th, 1996. Thank you, Mrs. Gamble, for coming and taking your time to sit with us today to talk about the Civil Rights Movement.
You're welcome.
I'd just like to start by asking some general questions about your family. Were you born in Birmingham?
Yes, I was.
You were, okay. Were your parents born in Birmingham?
No, they weren't.
What part of Alabama? Are they from Alabama?
Yes, they are. They both are from Alabama. My father is from Tuscaloosa, and my mother is Selma.
Okay. Then how many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have 3 sisters and 1 brother.
And where do you fit in that scheme of things?
I'm number 4.
You're number 4. Okay. Tell me about your parents' education. How much education did the 2 of them have?
My father has an associate degree, and my mother was a high school graduate,
Okay.
12th grade.
What about the occupations?
My father is retired from U.S. Steel, where he was a foreman in the coke department, and my mother was a housewife.
Okay, she never worked outside of the house?
She did at one while.
Okay. What kind of work did she do?
She worked in the clothing factory that was named Simon and McGillner at the time.
Okay. What about your education? How much education do you have?
I have a little here and a little there.
Which adds up to a lot.
Yes, it does. I finished Oman High School in 1965, May of 65. And from there, I went to Daniel Payne College from 65 to 66. In between that time, I went to different technical schools, career training, where I took IBM key punch, where I was a key punch operator. I have also had some pre-training in nursing, and I took that at Daniel Payne. I had courses taken at UAB, University of Alabama at Birmingham. I have an associate degree from Sanford University in paralegal studies, and since Sanford, I have been studying education at Birmingham Southern.
You have quite a varied educational background.
Well, yes, I do.
Yes. What's your occupation now? What do you do?
Right now, I'm employed by the Birmingham Public Schools, West End Ealerton Community School, where I am a program assistant in the community school, community education department.
What does a program assistant do?
I design programs for the people in the communities, for the children there at the schools, especially at my school, Ealerton School. I also create other programs like GED. I have basketball teams. I supervise 5 after-school care programs, and this is a program that the students are housed at their schools. In other words, we give them activities to do until the parents are off their jobs to come and pick them up.
I see. What age children are you referring to?
I'm in K through 5.
K through 5.
So we're talking about 5 to 11 or 12 years old.
Okay. Let's step back just a bit. Tell me, what community did you grow up in? What elementary school did you start?
I started at Kingston School.
Kingston.
Yes, and I went through the 4th grade at Kingston, and from Kingston School to Center Street School, I went there a short period. From Center Street to West Center Street, and of course from West Center Street to Ullman.
So you then lived in the Kingston community, and then in Titusville.
Correct.
Okay. How would you describe Kingston? Could you describe Kingston for me? What it was like growing up in Kingston?
When I grew up in Kingston, from 1947 through 1960, it was fairly quiet. The people were more united. sure, there were a few problems in Kingston at that time, but they were not, whereas we felt that we needed to really take some action, like maybe night watchers like we do now.
Right.
But overall, the people were mostly at home with their children, the mothers.
What kind of occupations did people have in Kingston? Do you remember? I know you were quite young at that time.
But from what I remember, most of the women were housewives.
Okay.
They stayed at home. Most of the men would work either in U.S. Steel, or they drove milk trucks at that time. They had jobs driving the milk trucks, the coal trucks, and delivering ice.
Did most people own their homes, or were they renting their homes?
Most of the people were buying their homes in the Kingston area. There were, of course, at that time, no housing areas, but they had homes like what they called shotgun homes and double tender homes where they rented from different sources. But the majority of people at that time were buying their homes.
Well, there were housing areas such as Illerton and Southtown Project, but they were designed for whites.
Exactly.
Yes.
See, at that time, since they were designed for whites and they were not in my community, I really didn't hear much about them. I didn't know much about them.
Right. How would you compare Kingston with Titusville?
It's different as night and day.
How?
When we moved, it was like a step we moved up. The reason we moved, number one, was because of the housing area. They bought our home so they could build the projects at that time. So we moved to Titusville, and the people were on a different grade, I would say, from the people in Kingston.
I mean, in terms of occupation?
Occupation, as far as their personalities, their education, they were on a different grade level.
What kind of occupations did people have in your community in Titusville?
When we moved to Titusville, they had occupations as the post office, school teachers, nurses, whereas in the Kingston community, the environment wasn't that big a variety for people having that type of a job, those types of a job.
There were few people that worked in the steel mills in Titusville than had been in Kingston.
I would say when we moved to Titusville, we found more that were employed in the steel mill.
Steel mills, okay. All right. But you did think that the move from Kingston to Titusville was in fact a step up economically to maybe middle class, higher middle class than had been in Kingston.
Number one, I guess being 10 and 11 years old, 9 years old, I was more impressed by what I was seeing because I was used to seeing those shotgun homes in Kingston. And we moved from shotgun homes to two-story homes,
the red
brick homes.
Right?
Exactly.
Well, what do you remember about your experiences at Kingston Elementary School?
I remember children being more eager to learn. I remember them being more obedient, orderly. I remember the teachers being a little closer to the students. They got to know the students. They got to know the students' parents. And if the students didn't act right in the classroom, if he or she forgot their homework, that teacher would visit those homes. And it was a lot more teacher-parent involvement with the students.
Was the same thing prevalent when you moved to Titusville and went to Center Street and to West Center Street?
Not as much, but it was. There was some. But in my opinion, not as much as it was when we were living in Kingston.
That's interesting because you're saying that you're moving up in terms of social economic standing, but the participation, parental participation, I assume, in the Titusville area seemingly was not as great as it was in Kingston.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
very interesting. What do you most remember about Oman?
I remember Dr. George C. Bell.
Dr. George C. Bell, your principal.
Exactly. I will never forget him as long as I shall live. Dr. Bell was a stern believer of discipline, of education, parent involvement, teacher-parent involvement. He enforced all of those things. And things were just so much different at Ullman. Of course, I visited Parker and other schools at that time, and there still was a difference from what I had seen at Parker compared to what I saw at Ullman.
Okay. Did you ever come out to Winona?
I didn't go out to Winona, but I did visit, after they built Hayes High School, I visited Hayes, of course, Parker.
Well, how did Ullman differ?
Leadership and leadership abilities and enforcing that leadership.
So you're suggesting that discipline was better at Ullman?
In my opinion, yes, from what I saw at the other schools, very much different.
Okay. What kind of extracurricular activities were you involved in within the school setting in Ullman?
At Ullman, I was in the Student Government Association. I was in the Spanish Club. I was involved in at that time they had the Y teams. Right. I was involved with the Y team. And also we had what we called the little sorority, the AKAs. We had a little sorority AKAs at that time, and I was a member of that. I didn't quite make it to the National Honor Society, but I'm still working on it.
Okay. Well, that's great. That meant that you were quite active.
Very.
In your high school.
Yes.
So you probably then would be termed one of the leaders of that high school, I would assume.
Yes, I would assume the same.
Okay. Tell me then, how and why did you get involved in the civil rights movement?
Well, it starts back at Kingston. I think what made a big impact on my decision was I was tired of looking in my 5th, 6th grade books and seeing a white child that had that book in the 4th grade.
And how did you know that?
Because I would see where you had to sign your books, and they put their teacher's name and their grade in there, the year. And I realized...
Why did that concern you at that
That let me
point?
know that I was behind that child. Educationally, I was behind 2 years or more behind that white child. And I felt that I deserved the right to be at the same level, if not above the level of that white child. That was the first thing that triggered it. The second thing was listening to my mother and father talk about having to keep their mouths shut, not saying anything because the white man might take it the wrong way, call them a smart nigger or whatever. And they had to keep their mouths closed for something that they believed in, for speaking up for something they believed in. Another thing was I went shopping with my mother, and I wanted some water. And I went to the white fountain. At that time, the colored sign was up, and the fountain was much lower. It was just a little sink. And then right beside it was a white cooler. Nice cool water, had white on it. I didn't understand why I had to go to the dirty sink when I wanted some cool water.
And this is when you were at Kingston.
This is when I was at Kingston, right. Okay. And it went on through 9th grade also. But I guess it made a bigger impact on me being in elementary school, not really understanding.
Did you and any of your peers ever talk about these kinds of issues, such as the books or the water fountains?
Definitely.
And how were those conversations generated? Were they generated within your group, or was that done in school, in the school
I was
setting?
usually the generator.
Okay, so
I would bring these things up because they meant a lot to me to talk about them, especially in my home. I think the bulk of the conversations would come from my home. My sisters and I would always talk about it. And of course, talking about it at home led it to outside of the home, into the schools. And a lot of the children felt the same way I felt. A lot of them felt there was nothing wrong with it. And then there were a lot of them that were taught not to say anything at all.
Right. But were you taught not to say anything?
I don't think I was taught one way or the other about that, of what to say and what not to say. I have always been taught to be my own person, stand up for what I believe in, as long as I'm doing it in a mannerly way.
Then these kinds of events sort of pricked your conscience as to the necessity for change. How then did you first get involved then with the Alabama Christian movement for human rights?
First, let me go back.
Okay.
My mother went to register to vote. There was a poll tax that she did not have. There was a lesson that she should have been studying to pass this test. And I said, for someone who lives in this country, this is a right that you should have without paying a poll tax, without taking a test. If you can, whether you can read or write, you should have had the right to voice your opinion of whom you wanted to be elected. And when she, studying this book, still didn't pass that test, we knew then that, hey, somebody needs to do something, because I knew that the white man up the street didn't have to go down there and take a test, number one. If he can read or write, he was allowed to vote. So it started, I believe, with the voting and with the water fountain and with the book. But my mother was very active in the movement. My mother is the first one to make the step. My father was not so active because he wasn't quite as nonviolent as you should be to work in the movement. But my mother was. So she went to the first meeting, and she came back and told us about the things that they would like to do. And Dr. King was, at that time, was not as active with the Birmingham movement. Reverend Shuttlesworth was. So she went and told us, she came back home and told us of all of the things that they had discussed in the plan and to whom they wanted to acknowledge as being leaders. And this struck a nerve with me. It struck an interest. And my sisters. The very next night, we went. And I guessed by being as active and as outspoken as I am, they saw something in me and my sisters. And then that's when they involved us more with the training process and the workshops that we attended to go out and recruit other students.
Okay. How would you describe the typical mass meeting?
A typical mass meeting was something that I always looked forward to because I knew every one of them was going to be typical. A typical mass meeting was hearing shouting, singing, having a hallelujah time, meeting, greeting, loving, caring, and sharing. You get to see people and meet people that you didn't know. You found more people more concerned about each other. You knew that you would get to hear a great speaker. Some great speakers, because the nights that Dr. King was not available, we always heard Reverend Shuttlesworth or Reverend N.H. Smith. It was always somebody there to give us a message that we needed to hear and that we enjoyed listening to.
There's been indications that many times there were children's meetings going on at the same time that the mass meetings were going on. Are you aware that there were the two meetings happening?
Yes, but at that time I was a child, but I didn't think I belonged with the children. But when you say children, I would refer more to the smaller children because I recall the teenagers my age being in the main sanctuary.
So younger children then would be in another, maybe an adjoining room or something.
Right.
Okay. Do you remember Birmingham policemen being present at any of the meetings?
Not directly in the meetings. You would find them patrolling the area. Being a teenager, of course, I would be outside and inside, you know. But I do recall seeing them patrol the area. I do not recall anyone being on the inside except perhaps a news reporter. You would see them occasionally in the building.
Yes. Did you participate in demonstrations?
Yes, I did.
Can you describe to me what it was like being a part of a demonstration, and which one do you remember most vividly? What sticks out in your mind about demonstrating?
I think I remember every one of them. I went to protest at least 20 times. I was arrested in Birmingham 2 times. And I guess the most part that sticks in my mind, as far as Birmingham is concerned, was when the officer asked for my name, a simple name, like Gwen. They couldn't spell it. So I wondered, how did they get to be police officers? Secondly, it's being tossed into what we call at that time the paddy wagon. And then they would put 10, 15 of us in a very small area and then throw the dog in the back with us.
Hey, let's back up a minute. Can you describe to me really the sequence of events that would take place prior to getting on the street? Most of the demonstrations, did they start at 16th Street?
Most of them would, yes.
Okay. Can you describe to me the series of events that would take place prior to coming out of 16th Street up to the time that you were arrested?
Okay. We were never just sent out. We were always briefed what to say, what not to say. We were always given our destination, where we were going. How many times, even if this time they say you will not go to jail. If we left out knowing that we were not going to jail, we knew how many times we had for the cop to ask us to disperse, to leave. But we were always told and trained in what we were doing, what to say, what not to say, what to give, what information to give them, what information not to give them. So we pretty much knew exactly where we were going. We were timed to the minute. You have 5 minutes, 8 seconds to get there, to your destination. Mostly my destination was J.J. Newberry's, downtown. There were times that we tried to not go the route that the cops thought we were going. That was a strategy that was used to try to make it to that destination, to get that opportunity to sit at the lunch counters.
You would normally be in a group?
In a group. We never under 10. Never under 10. Mainly, I would say pretty close to 50 people. You may have 50 going to this destination and 50 going to another. But as you left, your names were called. And you would line up so they could know exactly where you're supposed to be. And exactly if you were going to jail or if you're not going to jail.
Why was Newberry's such a popular place?
Because it was the most prejudiced place in town. Newberry's refused to serve black people at the lunch counter, upstairs or downstairs. They didn't want you to have a seat. Now, you can come to the edge of the counter, place your order, and take it out. But after all of the tries, they refused. They refused to let you sit there. And at that time, that counter was pretty busy.
Can you describe the circumstances of your first arrest?
My first arrest, I think I had the flu. And when I got there, I had to just strictly scrub floors because I put my head down. And my punishment was to scrub those floors with a toothbrush.
Well, why were you arrested in the first place?
They said it was because I refused to move after being ordered by an officer and also parading without a permit.
Was this at Newberry's?
That was in front of J.J. Newberry's.
And you talked about the paddy wagon earlier. Did they call in a paddy wagon? Was that when
The paddy wagons were always there. They didn't have to call them. They were always there. They were prepared.
And you said they would put you in the paddy wagon with others, and then was this the occasion that they actually put a dog in the paddy wagon with you? Can you describe that? What was that like?
Well, once they threw as many as they can of us in the paddy wagon, the dog would be the last treat because they knew we were frightened of them, number one. The dogs were trained to attack blacks. You know, they took the black dummies and the black rags, trained them to attack them. So it was to frighten us. And they did.
Was anyone injured or hurt as a
No,
result of that?
no one was injured.
Well,
but we
they
knew
wouldn't
not to move.
They did not leave the dog in there.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did.
From Newberry's to and what is happening in the wagon?
Well, we were told not to say anything. We didn't communicate at all. And we did exactly what we were instructed to do. So we didn't communicate. We just prayed and hoped that that dog didn't turn on us. And he didn't. As long as we were still and quiet, it didn't disturb him.
Okay. And then how long did you remain in jail?
The first time I went, I was in there 3 to 4 days. The second time, I was in there 4 days.
What do you remember most about being in prison?
I remember thinking, why am I in here with these people? I mean, I felt that we were there for different cause from the other people that were arrested for other reasons. And I felt that we should have been in a different place. If I'm going to be arrested, I should be in a holding cell or somewhere away from the criminals. But they put us all in the same cell with the criminals. And of course, it made me made me feel like, are they saying that I'm a criminal?
Well, how did those people who had been arrested, not for participating in the movement, how did they treat those of you who in fact were arrested for participating in demonstrations?
Believe it or not, they treat us fine. They didn't try to assault us in any way. They didn't ask too many questions, really. It was like they had already been schooled. You know, you have these people coming in, and they're coming in for this reason. I recall only a few questions even being asked by the inmates.
Right. And you were there for, 2 days or 4 days?
I was there 4 days.
What did you do while you were there?
It was so many of us there that they couldn't find much for us to do. In the daytime, we would sleep in the bunk at night in the cell. In the day, they would take us and put us in what they call a day cell. And that's where 50 or 100 children might be in that day cell. And all you do is sit around. That's all we did. Except the one time I put my head down and I had to scrub.
As a result of putting your head down, you had to scrub.
Absolutely. You were supposed to sit or stand. They couldn't feel that you were lounging in any way.
Okay. Not enjoying what
Right.
Did others in your family participate in the demonstration?
I had 2 sisters that did. I have cousins that demonstrated but were not arrested.
Were your sisters arrested?
Yes. Every time I went, they were there. Matter of fact, one sister, Dorothy, went more than I did because she was the type that couldn't really stay in there long. And she had it understood that I'll go, but I can't stay. So they would go and get her. But before we look up, she was back in there. So it was just a wheel for her to go and to come.
Were your mother ever arrested, or did she participate in the demonstrations?
No.
And did your father ever get involved?
No.
Okay.
Definitely not. But he supported us. He never told us not to go. He supported us. He just knew that it wasn't for him. So he stayed away.
In discussions with other individuals who were children at the time that were school age, they talked about going to school and then people coming to their various schools attempting to get them to join with them in a march from the school to the church and to other places. What were the circumstances with you?
I think what we did was quite effective. We had some children, of course, who had been dared by their parents not to move, so they didn't. But I believe overall it was quite effective. We had the majority of the children to leave the classrooms or to leave the schools and to join us in the march. That's how we got those thousands of children out there.
Okay, now you're saying to join you in the march. Were you designated as one of the people that would assist in attracting children from schools?
Yes, it was.
And how did that come about?
Meatball, who was one of Dr. King's aides, and Tommy Wren, I guess they saw the leadership abilities in us. So they asked us if we will to attend various workshops, training
meaning you
my
and
sisters,
your sisters.
my two sisters and I, to attend these workshops, get this special training, so we can go out and recruit these students to get them involved in the movement, because it was planned a long time ago that the adults are not the way, that the children are the one. Number one, they knew that the adults had to work. They had to provide for their families. And also, more harm would probably come to the adults than to the children. So that's how we were chosen. And my sisters and I always had, I guess, had a persuasive way about us, per se. And the children did listen. I guess setting examples and being a good role model is what really got it started.
So then, what was the plan? Like, I know you had a plan that that you would utilize to get children to leave school. How did that actually evolve?
Well, number one, we tried to get more of them out to the civil rights, to the movements, so they can actually see what's going on, and to let them realize that we are in this for all of us and for the betterment of all of us, and not just for a few of us. But we needed their help. We did 2 or 3, even 2,000 people couldn't have done it. It took all of us. And I even brought to their attention, look at the book that I had when I was in the 6th grade. And I found out that a 4th grade white children had it. Is this what we want all of our lives? I want my children to have a better education. I want them to be better living in this society. I wouldn't want them to go through what our parents and our grandparents. And that gave them something to think about. Probably some things were said to them that no one else had ever said to them. You know, it's no better way to get to a child than through another child.
What was the day of the march? You attracting children out of school. What was the process? How did you go about doing that?
Okay, from these different meetings, we knew exactly what time. We had different assigned classrooms to go to. We never entered into the classroom. We would pass by the door. And we would go by and give a cue. And next thing you know, they were following us because the word was already out that we were going to turn school out that day. Okay? They had already heard it. If I went to a meeting and they said, we're going to leave, Gwen, you have this area, you have this floor, Deborah, you have this floor. At this time, you would go by, you would give them the cue, they would follow you, you would lead them. They had a map of the building. They knew which door to take, we knew which door to take them out, which route to take to the destination. So all we had to do is give them a cue after they got the word, and those who wanted to follow, followed.
What was the reaction of your teachers and Dr. Bell?
We had some teachers that were, I believe, afraid. Then we had some teachers that believed in it and wanted to do more than what they were actually doing. I know a few teachers who actually, when they saw me coming, they knew where I was coming because they attended the mass meetings also. They would actually turn their heads and look out of the window. Like, if you walk out, I didn't give you permission, I don't see you, so go while my head is turned. Then we had some that said that we were troublemakers. We were disturbing the school, disturbing their classrooms. But the children went anyway.
Were you ever expelled from school?
No. I was told, though, in the 11th grade that I would be expelled. And my sister was entering the 12th grade, and she was told that she would not graduate because of the days that were missed out of school. But being expelled, I was not, because there was a hearing about that, and it was all thrown out of court.
Who told you that you would be expelled, that your sister would not graduate?
The principal did. They had gotten notices from the board that the children, well, first of all, they went and pulled our records from the family court and also from the city jail. If your name appeared on that list, then your parents were sent notices and the principals were sent notices that you would be either expelled if you were below the 12th grade. If you were getting ready to graduate, you would not graduate.
Was your brother ever involved?
No, he wasn't.
He was not. What church were you a member of?
In Titusville?
Yes.
New Pilgrim Baptist Church.
So your church was quite actively involved
Very.
in the movement. Your pastor was quite actively involved in the movement.
Yes.
What benefits did you, your family, and community realize as a result of the movement in Birmingham?
Well, number one, I don't think I would have the position that I have now. I wouldn't live in the community that I live in now. The education, the financial aid, all of the other things that I needed to get where I am today, they would have either been harder or impossible. I do think that some of the benefits that we have from the movement have been abused. I just wish that we would go back and just listen to the true stories of things that happened. Teach our children that things that are happening today are happening because of what happened in the civil rights movement. These things were not just given to them. And I guess I'm just so disturbed to see how they are abused and how our children abuse all the things that we went to jail for and that Dr. King and so many others lost their lives for. So we have a benefit in a way, but then in another way, we have harm.
Let me just step back for 1 second, because after your sophomore year in high school, during the summer, this is the summer of '63, you then went to St. Augustine, Florida. Is that correct?
It was in the summer of '63 or '64. Yes, that is correct.
And How did that materialize? How did you get the opportunity to go to St. Augustine?
Because of my experience in recruiting here in Birmingham and being pretty successful doing so, my sisters and I, along with some other recruiters, were asked to go to St. Augustine, Florida, because they were having a problem getting the people out to register to vote. They were having a problem even still sitting at the lunch counters. They were having a problem going to the beach to swim. And these people, they didn't either believe in it, or they just didn't do, or they didn't have the experience in what to do and how to go about doing it and how to recruit people. So we were asked from Birmingham to go.
Who asked you to go?
Tommy Wren and Meatball were the two that asked us. They recruited all of the students to go to St. Augustine.
This is SCLC.
So SCLC, right.
Okay.
When we decided the date that we were going, a bus was chartered. A matter of fact, it was a trailway bus. It was chartered from Birmingham through SCLC. And on our way to St. Augustine, the state troopers were trailing us.
Alabama State Troopers?
The Alabama, well, no, this was the Florida State Troopers. This is when we got into the Florida line. Apparently they had got word that this busload of black children were coming. And they stopped us on the side of the road and wanted to know where we were going. And they had got word that the Klansmen had got word, and they just stopped us to protect us. And they did escort us on into St. Augustine. Shortly after we got there, we found that, God, these people are behind. They didn't want, they call us the intruders, the outsiders coming in, taking over their little town.
Were these white people that were saying that?
These were black people. These were black people. And it was harder, I believe, to recruit them than it was to recruit the people in Birmingham. They didn't want to even listen to what we had to say. I think what they wanted us to do was go to jail for them and let them stay at home. But we couldn't get them to come out to the mass meetings as we did here in Birmingham. We couldn't get the children involved as much as we did here in Birmingham. And it could be because of the way the adults, the approach that they took as far as receiving us to come into St. Augustine.
Did you have contacts in the various churches, community organizations, or what were your contacts?
Our contacts was, at that time, the churches. And that was just as hard as contacting the people themselves. I mean, into the communities. We had a few people, just a few people, that were willing to learn so they can go out and teach the other children in the community. They were so laid back, as I would say, that when the Klansmen wanted to march, the black people were on the sidewalks. The Klansmen would march between them in the black communities.
Well, I know that you, although it was difficult organizing, you did participate in a demonstration in St. Augustine.
Yes.
And you were arrested.
Yes.
Can you tell me the circumstances?
Yes, this night was, Dr. King was supposed to have led the march. And I saw him when he came in, but for some reason, he didn't go. Reverend Shuttlesworth and Abernathy, Tommy Wren, Meatball, and a few others led the march that night. And I was like midway in the line. There were about maybe 300 people protesting through the square. We were marching, and suddenly people came from bushes, and I'm talking about white people. Some had on their capes, and some were just plainly dressed. And they started fighting everybody that they could come in contact with. And at that time, of course, by them jumping from bushes and coming from places that we didn't know they were there, the crowd just scattered. I think it frightened them more than anything. Well, when I realized what was happening, a hard object hit me on the side of my head. And that's when I fell. I lost consciousness for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. But I do remember being picked up and taken away from the square back to the headquarters. And Dr. King was standing outside when we drove up. And the driver of the car I was in told him that a riot had broken out. Right after then, I was still dizzy. They took me to the hospital in St. Augustine. They wouldn't see me.
Would not admit you.
They would not see me. They wouldn't let a doctor look at me. So I had to be placed back in the car, and they had to drive me all the way to Jacksonville.
How far is that?
Jacksonville is about 70 miles from St. Augustine. And that's where I was hospitalized there. I had a slight concussion, and I was hospitalized there 6, maybe 7 days.
Were you also arrested in St. Augustine?
Yes, I was.
That was on a different march?
It was on a different march.
Okay.
I think we conducted maybe 10 different marches while we were in St. Augustine. But the day that I was arrested from the International House of Pancakes, where we went in and asked to be served pancakes. And they asked us to leave, and we refused. When we did, at that time they did have to call the police. They called the police, and when they came, I guess they had learned the trade from Birmingham, the paddy wagon and the dog. Then we got to meet our dog friend again. But we were taken from there to the city jail.
And how long did you remain in city jail?
I was in there 4 days.
4 days?
Yes.
How would you compare the demonstrations and the treatment that you received in Birmingham with that you received in St. Augustine?
The treatment from the officers or
Yes,
from the...
from the officers.
Believe it or not, St. Augustine's officers were much nicer. They were more passionate, they were concerned. I do recall one particular warden. When we were there, we were served strained baby food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This one particular warden was quite concerned, and he asked us if we had any money. And for those of us who had money, he took the money, went across the street, and bought us sodas, chips, crackers, and other items like that, because he knew that we were hungry, and he knew that we weren't being treated fairly. So he did that for us, and we shared, everything that we were able to buy. We shared them with everyone in there. That was quite different from the arrest in Birmingham.
So then when you left St. Augustine, came back to Birmingham, you then would begin your junior year in high school. Were you still active in the movement?
Yes, I was. Matter of fact, I was active until the last actual meeting that we had. And since then, I have been other places like Atlanta, and at that time, I think they still had them going in Gaston and Anniston. We would attend the meetings in Atlanta and Gaston and Anniston.
So your experience then in the movement, particularly during your high school days, was rather extensive.
I should say so.
How then would you assess the Birmingham movement at the time? Was it a success? And did it really accomplish the things that you had anticipated it accomplishing?
I would say at that time, yes, I would say that it was a success. I think that we are the ones who have made it to be what it wasn't intended to be.
And what do you mean by that?
What I mean is there are so many things that we are doing to each other, to harm each other. That wasn't what the fight was all about. It looks like we reached the peak and we got there. We were there temporarily. And now we're back down here. Matter of fact, we may be a little lower because at least during the 50s, 60s, even the 40s, we didn't kill each other. We didn't hate each other. So the movement was all about love, togetherness, education, religion. Today, we're not practicing the things that the movement stood for.
Is the movement still active today? I mean, do you still have the same kinds of organizations that are active and attempting to do the things that are necessary today that would be similar to the Alabama Christian movement of yesteryear?
In my opinion, no. I would like to see it happen again, even if it's just for the togetherness of the black people. The movement was for togetherness for all people. There were white people that came into the movement, and they worked. There were some that were killed, some with broken noses. We went to St. Augustine. This particular white woman went out to protest with us on the beach, and they caught her out in the water and broke her nose. I mean, they burst her eardrum. So it was for all of us, and we need to stop and realize that it was for all of us, not just for you and not just for me.
The movement was massive, and there's no way for us to cover everything that you experienced during the time, but is there anything else that you would like to add at this point that we maybe have not dealt with that's related to your experiences?
Yes, two things. Number one is no one should think that it was easy. No one should think that no one was frightened. I recall my father and the other neighbors in the Titusville area, in the Titusville neighborhood, who had to patrol the community, who had to have night watch duty, because the Klansmen were patrolling the areas, throwing bombs, especially if they knew that even if it's your child, if they were involved in the movement, your name came to surface, they would find some kind of way to get you. Throw a bomb, burn a cross, spray paint your home. Any of those things, we were at risk. It was no fun. Sure, we got to meet people. I was young, but it still was no fun. I knew once that water hose hit me, I didn't know if I was going to survive it or not, because the pressure from that hose was so great, it would actually knock your breath away. Secondly, if we would teach our children, and I know we hear them say today, oh, that was back then, I won't take that. They would be better off if they were back then and would take that. They would be better citizens. They would realize that things don't just come to you on a silver platter. You have to work for them. And all of that's going to start with the parents at home. Our parents, for some reason, have forgotten how these things came about also. The children don't know because the parents haven't taken the time to teach them. I have done several videos at schools with children, and I have shown them where the water was forced on the people. I have shown them where the dogs bit people. And the first thing they say is, I won't let that happen to me. They laugh about it. They think it's funny to see this happen. And then there are some things that you can show them or tell them. They had no idea. They had no idea. So my point is that once the parents and the adults start waking up and facing reality, the things that are happening today, it's our fault. As being adults, it's our fault. Because we've made rules and we've made laws for the children to protect the children only. and they know of these laws, they know that this law is to protect me, I can do this and get away with it. If you or I go out and break the law, we're not going to know what the sentence is or what our punishment is until we face that judge. Our children know right off the top, if I do this, I'll get this. So that means I have 2 more times to do it before action is taken. We need to go back.
Thank you, Mrs. Gamble.
Thank you.
Well,